let me take you back or tell it as a little bit of a story, because I think it's helpful to understand it in some context in a time. And CORT, as a community housing provider, has grown and learnt a lot of things over about 35 years. And CORT didn't start as a developer of new housing. CORT started as a small trust, as a response from a church. How do we help vulnerable people in our community? Somewhere along that journey involved starting to buy homes, and then starting to buy what we thought were more appropriate homes for the groups that we were trying to serve. Then came a new sort of realization that actually developing homes was a very important piece of that, in terms of both the quality of the homes that we could offer, but also that there just weren't enough homes, and that our city needed more. They needed the right homes in the right places. And so could a small trust that started not that long ago make a contribution in that space? And CORT's response to that was to continue to work with government and to continue to work with our bank, and had very good relationships with both, and at various times took advantage of funding that was available, and using our sort of bank funding as we could. Changes in the sort of government funding space meant, that we had to be agile, I suppose, is the best way to look at it, and think about how might we do this differently. And I think fortunately ACC, and so this is the example I think that we've been talking about this afternoon at the conference, but is the one that's most in front for us at the moment, came to us and said, hey, we're interested in the housing space and we'd like to work with yourselves. And not my work, but previous people in the organisation. ACC said, you've got a good reputation in terms of development, in terms of looking after homes, in terms of building community. So that was something that I'm very interested in. And so at that stage, we set up something that I think was a bit new for New Zealand. And I think what the recognition is, that's not necessarily new in other parts of the world. And what we're talking about is long-term investment capital. So over a 25-year period, funding some new homes. The cash flow, which is generated by the government subsidy, supports that capital investment, but doing that over a longer period of time. And housing in New Zealand, I think, has generally been supported by either direct capital government grants or mainstream finance, your mainstream banks. And the horizons of that finance is more like 5 years, not 25 years. And so what's new, I think, in this space for us is that not that we invented the concept of long-term finance or that we invented long-term JVs, but that we've managed to make it happen. And so I guess that's if you like, that's the trailblazing part. And again, I tip my hat to a whole lot of other people in the organisation who sort of have made that happen. So yeah, I guess that's the context I guess I'd provide, in that we haven't invented anything new, but we've brought together some pieces at a space and time in our country where it was needed. And that was our vehicle, and this is the important bit for the CORT and why we exist, to build, in this case, 104 new homes for people that really need them. I guess I would certainly put my hand up at this stage and saying I'm not an expert in the finance sort of world, and our work through this space is to bring in those experts as we've needed them. But I think generally speaking, that whether it's our mainstream banks or others are looking for a return that's shorter than that, so it has to be a shorter term, or they're looking to sort of hedge that risk. So there's risk in the finance world of whether those interest rates, which are in our case controlled by the Reserve Bank, may go up or down, and so 5-year horizons are easier to sort of hedge that risk against. There's a whole lot of, I guess, more complex finance conversations that sit behind where people are and the size of the debt that they're willing to lend, and what's the period of time they're willing to do it over. And in New Zealand at the moment, ACC is one of those people, and they're investing across the country in all sorts of infrastructure projects. And this is another one that we're fortunate to sort of be partnering with them on. So using this model, which is this new one for us, this joint venture with ACC, it will result in 104 new homes across 7 different development sites. And so that'll be taking us through for the next couple of years. We've finished one development, which is fantastic. 15 homes have been completed, and then there's 6 more projects that we're working our way through. So really, I think this is a finance piece that's pragmatic about how do we match the government funding settings for, in this case, public housing or IRRS housing, with the best possible finance to make that happen. And this is one example. I don't think we ever would want to look at this in a sort of binary way. This is an example or a case study that we've managed to operationalize currently and I think there'll be learning and evolution from here. It's a good question to put our cast our eyes to. What's the ideal, or what's that utopian sort of setting where we think we can get things right faster? And I think you've got to look at who are the players who could essentially fund large-scale housing over a short period of time. And the first people in there are central government, and they've always got a part here, and they are providing a significant part of this picture. And if we look at CORT, they're providing a significant amount of funding over 25 years via the rent and the operating supplement. And I could only sort of assume or be sort of casting assumptions in terms of what central government could or should do, or why they're constrained in certain ways. But I think our role in pulling all this together has always been one of what's the opportunity that's in front of us to do more. And so that's where we're at. But it's a very good question. And I think that's been a really a fantastic highlight of the conference, or any of these sorts of conversations that we have, in terms of, well, this is what we've got, this is what we're doing, but what could come next, and how could we do this better? Yeah, I think you've got to look at it a little bit holistically, as much as we possibly can. Or in the words of today, the housing system, right? I think any growth in terms of the public housing register will be a direct result of what else is going on in the wider housing sort of system. And so just to sort of speak directly to CORT and what we're doing, the focus of the trust and our values are very much in terms of how do we make our impact the greatest and for people that need it the most. So and vulnerability comes in a whole lot of different ways, right? And the barriers to finding a good home will first and foremost be your income or your financial situation. And so for that reason, we've always focused on people on the lowest incomes. And currently that's really defined by who's on that public housing register. So yes, our homes are in that space. And that's really people who are there. We also work very closely with a whole lot of support agencies. So where people have, a whole lot of other barriers that even if income wasn't a problem, they may still struggle to find a place in their community. And so for us, a home is all about all of those factors, and we're very interested in pulling all of those levers. It's not just building a great house and thinking about what it would be like to live there, and would we live there, and how does it work? How do those neighbours interact? How does our new development interact with the wider neighbourhood? Where is this thing? Is it in a good spot? Will people actually thrive there? Those are as crucial to us to be answering those questions as does this thing stack up over a 25-year financial sort of period? And so those questions are crucial. When we look at the broader picture, the public housing register has grown significantly because we are sorely lacking affordable rentals and pathways to home ownership. These things are all connected. There's no doubt about it. And I think CORT's work has very much been at that for people who are really have very, very few options, significant barriers. And I think to some degree, even if the housing system was functioning better, there would still be a strong need for what CORT provides. But we're very interested in the bigger picture. We're never divorced from it. We're always affected by it. And where we can, we will influence it and provide solutions in other sections as well. In terms of how we might do more in terms of the public housing register, which is clearly a strong focus, and I think it should be a strong focus, but how do we create more options out there? CORT's been very fortunate to be involved in some fantastic partnerships, and one is Waimahi Inlet, and the other one is what we refer to as Punui Park, and both parcels of land in Auckland where we've partnered into some consortium relationships with the New Zealand Housing Foundation and Tutu Mukainga, and those have been neighbourhood developments where we've built both public housing, affordable rentals, and shared equity, as well as private market homes. And so we've really case studied some fantastic ways of partnering to provide options all across the housing continuum or the housing system. And so I think there's any number of ways that could be replicated, both by, either that consortium or other partners. And I think you're starting to see more of that across the country. And there's a recognition that not only are all of these ways of funding different types of tenure important, they actually work very well together. Because when we boil it down as well into what's the community that you're creating, what's the thing that you're nurturing, where you've got a wonderful diversity of people who you're offering that community or a pathway into that community, you end up with more resilient, better communities as well. So it's both how do we fix this big systemic problem, but how on the ground are we creating excellent places in a very good city where everybody has a place. So in terms of how do we enable more pathways or more ownership, if I was to sort of bring it right back to what do we need to do in that space, ultimately it's to build more homes. The pathways and the structures, I think there's a huge willingness both within the community housing sector and government to make those things happen. They can't happen until you build the homes and until you get some finance to build those homes, or some funding and finance go together. I think there's certainly some levers that we could be pulling with government providing some backing to let's say there was a financial pool or a bond aggregation that government backed and said, hey, this is being drawn by our trusted community housing sector, and we know that we're backing it with some funding, and therefore it's a very known proposition. If I was in the finance sector and I was approached and said, hey, this particular housing project has a 25-year government-backed rental stream, hey, that becomes very appealing in terms of that. So I think government, we would say, can and should have a role to be providing some more surety, which would bridge the gap, I think, between what we're doing on the ground, the community sector, and the financial sector, and bringing those a bit closer. In doing so, the intention would be to lower the cost of finance, therefore lower the cost of the homes, do more. So I think, and then ultimately what happens with those homes can be any of number of those very good things, whether it's public housing, affordable rentals, or pathways to home ownership. They're all possibilities once you sort of crack some of those cost and supply issues. I think the what resonates, or the question that you always want, that we want to answer, is how do we keep community at the heart of all of this? We work through some very technical sort of questions in terms of, if we're talking about finance, we work through some very technical sort of issues of cost and risk and partnerships and all of those pieces. And where I put on my CORT hat, and one of the reasons I love working at CORT is we're always putting community at the middle of that. And I think part of that is to say, well, even if we get all of this right, what are we doing with that, and who is it for, and will it work for them? And going right back to the beginning of CORT, it was a community that got together to do something in their community, and we hang ourselves on this word of community, and it can be redefined in all sorts of different ways, but ultimately for us it means who's going to be living in their home, in these homes, and what does it mean for them. So I think that's for me a very grounding, but I think it really brings some clarity to all of these bigger, sometimes more difficult conversations around finance, home building, cost, etc.